I'm telling you this now, long after the dust has settled and the whispers have died. I'm telling you this because the story people tell is not the true one. They speak of a calculating woman, a vengeful maid, and a cold-blooded monster who used her for his own ends. They see the ending, but they never understood the beginning. They never understood the silence of a hospital waiting room at 3 in the morning or the weight of a single glass of wine. The story isn't about how I destroyed a powerful man. It's about the man who watched me do it and what he did next. It started, as so many desperate things do, with a love that was being crushed under the heel of money. My brother, Leo, was made of sunlight and fragile bones. He had a heart that was beating itself to death, a rare congenital defect that the doctors spoke of in hushed, sympathetic tones. They used long, complicated words, but they all meant the same thing. Time was running out. There was a surgery, a new, experimental procedure that was less a guarantee and more a sliver of a chance. It cost more money than anyone in our family had ever seen or would ever see in 10 lifetimes. I worked as a maid, a house cleaner. I was one of the invisible people who moved through the lives of the wealthy, dusting their memories, polishing their veneers, and emptying the trash cans filled with the casual debris of their existence. I worked for the Moretti family. Or rather, I worked for Julian Moretti. Julian was the younger brother, the public face of the family. He was handsome in a way that seemed machine-tooled, his smile perfectly calibrated for magazine covers. He ran the family's legitimate businesses, their philanthropic foundations, their public relations. He was lauded in the city as a saint, a benefactor, a man of the people. I knew he was a monster. I saw the flashes of it. The way his smile died the second a camera turned away. The cold, dismissive cruelty in his eyes when he spoke to staff. The way he talked about the poor people his charities helped, as if they were a different species, a problem to be managed rather than people to be helped. But I was desperate, and desperate people make fools of themselves in the presence of false gods. I had approached him weeks earlier, my request a stone in my throat. I had the medical file, the letters from the doctors, the terrifying cost estimate. I chose my moment carefully when he was alone in his vast, sterile study. He had listened. He'd even feigned compassion, his brow furrowed in that practiced way he had. He'd taken the folder from my trembling hands. "Leave it with me, Ilera," he had said, his voice like smooth, cold marble. "Let me see what I can do. The Moretti Foundation is here for exactly these kinds of tragic cases." He gave me hope. It was the cruelest thing he could have done. For 3 weeks, he dangled that hope in front of me. He would see me in the hallways and give me a small, encouraging nod. "Still working on it," he'd murmur. "These things take time." I lived on those crumbs. I told Leo we had a chance. I saw the light come back into his tired eyes. The hospital's final notice came on a Tuesday. The surgery had to be paid for, in full, within 72 hours, or Leo would be moved to palliative care. The slot would be given to someone else. 72 hours. I found Julian that afternoon. He was with his fiancée, Isabella, in the grand drawing room, looking over seating charts for some charity gala. Isabella had sharp, beautiful features and an expression of perpetual, bored disdain. She always looked at me like I was something she'd scraped off her shoe. I stood in the doorway, my heart hammering against my ribs. I was a maid in my plain gray uniform. I knew I was breaking a dozen rules of protocol. "Mr. Moretti," I said, my voice barely a whisper. He looked up, and for a second, he seemed to forget who I was. Then recognition dawned, followed by irritation. "What is it, Ilera?" "I'm Busse." Isabella didn't even look at me. She just made a small sound of annoyance. "The hospital," I stammered, clutching the notice in my pocket. "They called. The deadline is Friday." Julian sighed, a theatrical sound of a man burdened by the trivialities of others. He put down his pen and looked at me. His eyes were completely empty of the warmth he'd pretended before. "Oh, that," he said, his voice casual. He glanced at Isabella, a small, cruel smirk playing on his lips. "I'm afraid the Foundation Board reviewed your case. It was denied." The floor seemed to drop out from under me. "Denied? But you said You said you would help. I said I would look into it, he corrected, his voice hardening. And I did. Unfortunately, the procedure is too experimental. The foundation has a responsibility to its donors not to throw money away on long shots. Long shots? He was talking about my brother's life. Tears burned my eyes. Please, Mr. Moretti. Julian. He's my brother. He's just a boy. That was when Isabella finally deigned to speak. She looked me up and down, her lip curled. It's truly pathetic, the way people like you think you're entitled to other people's money. Did you really think he was going to pay? It was just a way to keep you from blubbering all over the house. The casual cruelty of it stole my breath. I looked back at Julian, begging him with my eyes, pleading for him to deny it, to show a shred of the decency he performed for the world. He just shrugged. She has a point, Alara. You've been a decent cleaner, but let's not get carried away. Your family's problems are not my own. He picked up his pen again. Now, if you'll excuse us and clear out your things, your services are no longer required. I can't have emotionally unstable people on my staff. He fired me. He took my brother's last hope and then took my job, all in the same breath, without so much as a flicker of conscience. I didn't say another word. I just turned and walked away, the sound of their light, dismissive laughter following me down the hall. The sound was like glass grinding in my ears. I ran. I didn't even go to my locker. I just ran out of the house, out of the gates, and down the street, shame and despair a hot, choking tide in my throat. I ran until my lungs burned and my vision swam. He had called Leo a long shot, a waste of money. That evening, I sat in the dark of my tiny apartment, the eviction notice on the table next to the hospital's final demand. I was scrolling numbly through my phone when I saw it. A news article. Julian Moretti to be honored at the Children's Hospital Foundation Gala tonight. He was being honored for his charity tonight. Something inside me, something that had been worn down and eroded by years of quiet survival, finally snapped. The image of him on that stage, accepting praise for his generosity while my brother was being sent home to die, was more than I could bear. The world went very still. A cold, clear thought cut through the fog of my grief. He would not celebrate. I didn't have a fully formed plan. It was an impulse born of pure, distilled rage. I remembered the catering company that worked the Moretti events. I had a friend who worked for them. I called her, my voice strained. I told her I was desperate for cash, that I'd been let go and needed a shift, any shift. By some miracle or some twist of cruel fate, they were short-staffed for the gala that night. They needed a server. An hour later, I was standing in a service corridor of the city's most opulent hotel, pulling on a uniform that was a size too small. It was black, not gray, but it felt the same. It was a cloak of invisibility. In my pocket was a small vial. It contained a powerful sedative I had been prescribed for sleep months ago after a particularly bad panic attack. I'd never used it. The doctor had warned me that even a small overdose could cause temporary paralysis, respiratory distress, a dramatic, terrifying collapse. It wasn't poison. I didn't want to kill him. I wasn't a murderer. I just wanted to take something from him. I wanted to wipe that smug, perfect smile off his face. I wanted him to feel, for one single night, the terror that Leo lived with every day. I wanted him to be the one people looked at with pity and fear. I wanted to ruin his perfect night. The ballroom was a galaxy of shimmering gowns and black tuxedos. Diamonds glittered at throats and wrists. The air hummed with the sound of a string quartet and the low murmur of powerful people making powerful conversation. It was a world away from my reality, a different planet. My hands trembled as I carried a tray of champagne flutes. I scanned the room, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. I saw him at the head table, table 1, right in front of the stage. He was laughing, holding court, Isabella clinging to his arm, looking radiant and cruel. I felt a wave of nausea. How could he sit there, so untouched, so content? My job was simple. Refill water, serve wine, clear plates. Be invisible. I moved through the tables, my eyes fixed on my task, but my entire being was focused on table 1. Then I saw the other Moretti, Dante Moretti. He sat at the same table, but he was a world apart from his brother. Where Julian was polished and bright, Dante was a figure carved from shadow. He wore a tuxedo that seemed to absorb the light around him. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't talking. He was just watching. Everyone knew who Dante was. He was the real power in the Moretti family. The papers didn't write articles about him. Photographers didn't dare point their cameras his way. He was the head of the family's other business. The business that paid for all this philanthropy and shine. He was a man whispered about in fear. A man who moved in a cone of absolute silence. They called him the tyrant. He was watching the room with a stillness that was more menacing than any overt threat. His eyes, dark and heavy-lidded, missed nothing. And then they settled on me. It was just for a second. A brief, passing glance. But it felt like being pinned to a board. He didn't see a maid. I felt, somehow, that he saw me. He saw the tremor in my hand. He saw the ill-fitting uniform. He saw something more than the caterer. And then his gaze moved on. My nerve almost broke. This was insane. This man was at that table. The devil himself was sitting 3 feet from my target. But then I thought of Leo. I thought of his pale face and the quiet beep of the machines that were keeping him alive. I thought of Julian's laugh echoing down the marble hallway. The rage came back, cold and steady. The first course was cleared. The wine was being poured for the main course. A deep, rich red. Julian, I knew, always drank red wine with his meal. He had a specific vintage he preferred. A bottle of it was already on the table, breathing. This was my chance. My station was near the kitchens. I was tasked with bringing out the fresh wine glasses. My hands were sweating. I palmed the small vial in my pocket. My heart was a wild bird trapped in my chest. I uncapped it inside my pocket, my fingers clumsy. I tilted a few drops onto my fingertip. It was all I dared. I couldn't risk being seen pouring liquid into a glass. I just needed to coat the inside rim. The wine would do the rest. I picked up 2 glasses, heading towards the head table. One for Julian, one for Isabella. I had coated the rim of one. As I approached the table, my path was momentarily blocked by another server. I sidestepped, my focus absolute. Julian was in the middle of a story, his hands gesturing expansively. Isabella was looking at him with adoration. No one was watching me. No one except Dante. His eyes were on me again. Not on my face, but on my hands. On the 2 glasses I was carrying. It was as if he could smell the desperation and the intent coming off me in waves. His expression didn't change. He remained perfectly still, but he was watching. I froze for a microsecond. My blood turned to ice. He knew. He couldn't know, but he knew. I had to turn back. I had to abort. This was madness. But Julian laughed then, a loud, braying sound of pure self-satisfaction. It was the same laugh from the hallway. And I moved. My training took over. I leaned in smoothly. "Excuse me, Mr. Moretti, madam." I placed the clean glass in front of Isabella. And then, with a hand that I willed to be steady, I picked up Julian's half-empty water glass to make room for the wine glass. As I did, my other hand, the one holding his fresh wine glass, moved over the table. It was a subtle, fluid motion, a sleight of hand born of utter desperation. I picked up the glass that was already in front of him, the one the sommelier had poured into moments before. And in its place, I set down the one from my tray. The clean one, the one I hadn't touched. I had swapped his glass for a clean one. And I had placed the drugged glass, the one intended for Julian, right beside his brother's plate, right in front of Dante Moretti. I didn't realize what I'd done until I was pulling away from the table. The glasses were identical. In my panic, in my haste to get away from Dante's gaze, I had mixed them up. My target had been Julian, but the poisoned chalice now sat before the tyrant. My entire body went rigid with a terror so profound it was paralyzing. I had just tried to poison the most dangerous man in the city. I backed away from the table, my tray rattling in my hands. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run back and snatch the glass away, but it was too late. Dante's eyes followed me. They were unreadable, but I felt them like a physical weight. He hadn't moved. He hadn't called out. He just watched me retreat. He knew. He had seen the swap. He had seen everything. And he did nothing. I stumbled back towards the service station, my mind a white-hot blank of panic. I was going to die. He would have his men drag me out of here, and I would simply disappear. My brother would die alone. It was all over. I watched, horrified, as the sommelier returned to the table. He picked up the bottle of expensive red wine. He poured a measure into the glass in front of Julian. Then he moved to Dante. He poured the wine into the glass I placed there. The wine swirled, a deep crimson, washing over the tasteless, colorless sedative I had smeared on the rim. My breath hitched. My vision tunneled. This was it. Dante picked up the glass. He looked at it. He didn't swirl it. He didn't sniff it, as the connoisseurs did. He just looked at the wine, his face a mask of stone. Then he lifted his eyes and looked directly at me, across the crowded, noisy room. Our gazes locked. There was no one else in the world. Just me, a terrified maid in a cheap uniform, and him, a king of the underworld holding his own execution in his hand. And he knew I hadn't meant it for him. I saw it in his eyes. He had seen my focus on Julian. He understood. Slowly, deliberately, while holding my gaze, he raised the glass. I saw his brother, Julian, say something to him, gesturing with his own glass. It was time for the toast. The chairman of the board was on stage, beginning his glowing introduction of Julian Moretti. Dante ignored him. His attention was entirely on me. He took a sip. No, not a sip. He drank. He drank a deep, long draught from the glass, never breaking eye contact. It was a statement, a challenge, an acceptance. Then he set the glass down with a soft click that I felt rather than heard. The room erupted in applause as the chairman finished his speech. And now, to present him with this award for his outstanding contributions, a man who needs no introduction, his brother, Dante Moretti. A spotlight swung to find Dante. But Dante wasn't rising. He was still looking at me. A strange, almost imperceptible shift occurred in his expression, a slight tightening around his eyes. Julian, annoyed at being upstaged, leaned over. Dante, get up. They're waiting. Dante didn't respond. He brought a hand to his chest, a slow, deliberate movement. His gaze finally broke from mine, and he looked down at the table, as if in mild surprise. Then he slumped sideways. He didn't collapse violently. He simply folded. He slid from his chair and hit the floor with a heavy, muffled thud. The silence that followed was more shocking than a scream. For a second, the entire ballroom froze. Then Isabella shrieked. Chaos erupted. People were shouting. Chairs were scraping. Julian was on his knees, shaking his brother's shoulder. Dante, what's wrong? Medic, security, Dante's own men, moved with terrifying speed. They formed a human wall around the table, their faces grim, their hands inside their jackets. They were not hotel security. They were soldiers. My blood had turned to slush in my veins. I was frozen in place, a statue of pure terror. I had done this. I had poisoned Dante Moretti. I had meant to wound a monster and had instead struck down a king. Through a gap in the chaos, I saw one of Dante's men, a mountain with a scarred face, lean down and speak into his wrist. His eyes were scanning the room, cold and methodical. Searching. They were searching for me. I had to run. I turned, dropping my tray with a crash that was lost in the din. I pushed my way through the panicking servers, my only thought to get to the service exit, to disappear into the night. I burst through the swinging doors into the relative quiet of the kitchen corridor, my breath coming in ragged, painful sobs. I was dead. I was already a ghost. I scrambled down the hallway, my cheap shoes slipping on the tiled floor. The exit was just ahead. Freedom. A few more seconds of life before they found me. A hand shot out from a doorway and clamped around my arm. I cried out, a pathetic little squeak of terror. I was yanked sideways, hard, into a small, dark utility closet. The door clicked shut behind me, plunging us into darkness. I was pressed against the wall, a large body blocking the door. I could smell expensive cologne and something else, something metallic and dangerous, like ozone after a lightning strike. I knew who it was before he spoke. The voice was low, a gravelly whisper that cut through my panic like a shard of ice. You run fast. It was the mountain. The scarred man. Dante's lieutenant. I started to babble, tears streaming down my face. I didn't mean to. It was a mistake. It was for Julian. Please, I have a brother. He's sick. Quiet, he commanded, and the word had so much force, I instantly fell silent. I waited in the suffocating darkness, my entire body trembling, waiting for the end. I heard muffled shouts from the hallway. His men, searching for me. He was waiting for them to pass. After a long, agonizing minute, he spoke again, his voice still a low rumble. The boss wants to see you. I flinched. The boss. But I saw him. He's fine, the man said, a hint of something that might have been grim amusement in his tone. Annoyed, but fine. He wants to know why. I couldn't process it. Fine. I saw him collapse. The sedative was potent. It should have put a man his size down for hours. I don't understand, I whispered. You will. He opened the door a crack, peered out, then pulled me out into the corridor. He kept a firm grip on my arm, his fingers like steel bands. He led me not towards an exit, but deeper into the hotel's service labyrinth. We went up a service elevator, the silence thick with my fear and his stony presence. We emerged into a plush, carpeted hallway. Apprends tout de suite. He opened a door and pushed me inside. Wait here, he said, and closed the door, leaving me alone. The suite was enormous, all dark wood and leather, with a vast window overlooking the glittering city. It was a room that radiated quiet, absolute power. On a low table, a single glass of red wine sat, half empty. My heart stopped. A door to an adjoining room opened, and Dante Moretti walked out. He was no longer in his tuxedo jacket. He was in his shirt sleeves, his tie loosened. His face was pale, and there was a sheen of sweat on his brow. But he was standing. He was alive. He was looking at me with those same, unreadable eyes. He walked slowly towards the table and picked up the glass of wine. My wine glass. A potent mixture, he said, his voice quiet but carrying the weight of command. It was the first time I had ever heard him speak more than a single word. My physician is impressed and curious. I just stared, unable to form a coherent thought. Ow, I have a certain tolerance, he said, a dismissive wave of his hand. An unfortunate necessity in my line of work. It was enough to be convincing. Not enough to do permanent damage. He took another small sip from the glass, as if to prove his point. A shiver of pure madness went through me. He had known the glass was drugged. He had drunk it anyway. He had faked the collapse. The question was a choked whisper. Why? Dante set the glass down. He walked towards me, stopping a few feet away. He was taller than I had realized, and his presence was overwhelming. It felt like standing too close to a furnace. That's my question for you, he said, his voice dropping lower. You weren't aiming for me. You were aiming for my brother. What? The question hung in the air between us, simple and direct. It was not an accusation. It was a genuine inquiry. In that moment, he was not a monster. He was a man demanding a truth he felt he was owed. And so I told him. The words came tumbling out, a torrent of grief and rage and desperation. I told him about Leo, about the surgery, about Julian's false promise, the weeks of hope he had fed me, and the casual, public cruelty of his denial. I told him about being fired, about the gala, about the unbearable injustice of him being celebrated for the very humanity he lacked. I cried as I spoke, not caring about the tears, about how pathetic I must have looked. I had nothing left to lose. When I was finished, I stood there, empty and trembling, waiting for his judgment. He was silent for a long time, his dark eyes searching my face. He was looking for something. The truth, maybe, or a lie. Finally, he gave a single, sharp nod, as if I had confirmed something he already suspected. My brother is a peacock, he said, the words clipped and precise. Vying. Cruel. A disappointment. He said the word disappointment with a finality that was more chilling than any curse. He turned and walked to the vast window, looking down at the city lights. When Julian wakes up in the hospital, he will be furious, Dante said, his back to me. He will believe you try to kill him. He will not rest until he has destroyed you. He will use his power, the police, the press. He will find your brother. He will make sure that boy never gets his surgery. He will make sure you spend the rest of your life in a cage, either literal or figurative. Every word was a nail in my coffin. He was laying out my future, my doom, with cold, dispassionate clarity. So, he continued, still not looking at me. You have a choice. You can walk out that door. My man, Marco, will see you out of the hotel. You will have a few hours, maybe a day, before Julian's machine finds you. Or, he paused. He turned around slowly. Or you can stay with me. I stared at him, confused. Stay with you. Julian will not touch what is mine, he said simply. The possessiveness in his tone was absolute. It was not a boast. It was a statement of fact, as undeniable as gravity. If you are under my protection, he can do nothing. A cold dread washed over me. This was the price. I would trade one monster for another. I would escape Julian's cage only to walk into Dante's. Why? I whispered. Why would you help me? Because you did what I've been tempted to do for years, he said, and a flicker of something dark and ancient moved in his eyes. You tried to humble him. You failed, but you tried. That is interesting. He saw my hesitation, my fear. This is not a negotiation, Ilera, he said, his voice hardening again. It is a logical assessment of your situation. Your brother needs surgery. The clock is ticking. He pulled out his phone. He tapped the screen a few times. What is the name of your brother's surgeon? In which hospital? I told him, my voice numb. He made a call. He spoke in rapid Italian, his tone clipped and authoritative. I only understood a few words. Surgery, tomorrow payment. He hung up and looked at me. Dr. Albright will operate on your brother tomorrow morning at 7. My foundation is covering the full cost. A car is waiting downstairs to take you to the hospital. You should be there when he wakes up. Just like that. With a single phone call, he had done what I had spent months begging and scraping and failing to do. He had moved a mountain. I felt a wave of dizzying, disbelieving relief, immediately followed by a sharp, cold spike of fear. This kind of power came with a price. A terrible price. What do you want from me? I asked, my voice shaking. Dante Moretti put his phone away. He looked at me, and his face was a mask I could not decipher. For now, he said quietly, I want you to go and see your brother, and I want you to understand that you are no longer invisible. Marco, the silent giant, drove me through the sleeping city. The streets were empty, the world washed in the blue-gray light of pre-dawn. I sat in the back of the black, impossibly silent car, my mind reeling. I was free, but I was a prisoner. My brother was saved, but I was bought. At the hospital, Marco simply said, I will be here, and then melted into the shadows of the parking garage. I walked into the sterile, quiet building that had been the site of all my fears. I went to the cardiac floor. The night nurse looked at me, surprised, then saw something on her computer screen. Her attitude shifted instantly. She became deferential, respectful. Miss Ilera, we've been expecting you. Dr. Albright is already here, preparing. We're taking Leo to pre-op in an hour. I went to Leo's room. He was asleep, his face pale against the white pillows, but his breathing seemed less labored. I sat in the chair beside his bed, the same chair where I'd spent countless nights watching him, praying. But tonight was different. Tonight, hope was not a desperate, flickering candle. It was a roaring fire, lit by a dangerous man in a penthouse suite. I watched my brother sleep, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't cry. I felt a strange, chilling calm. I had stepped into a different world, a world of shadows and power, and I did not know if I would ever find my way out. Hours later, a surgeon with kind eyes and miraculously steady hands came to find me in the waiting room. It was a success, Dr. Albright said, a tired but genuine smile on his face. The procedure went perfectly. He's a strong kid. He'll be in recovery for a while, but his prognosis is excellent. The relief was so immense, so total, that my knees buckled. I caught myself on a chair, gasping for air. Excellent. The word was a miracle. I stayed at the hospital for 3 days. I slept in the uncomfortable waiting room chairs, ate vending machine sandwiches, and spent every permitted second at Leo's bedside, watching him get stronger. Dante Moretti did not call. He did not appear, but his presence was a constant, unseen force. My meals were suddenly delivered from expensive restaurants. A private room was arranged for Leo, one with a view of the park. The nurses and doctors treated me with a level of deference that was unsettling. They treated me like I was one of the Morettis. Marco was always there, a silent statue near the elevators or in the cafeteria. He never spoke to me, but I knew he was reporting my every move back to his boss. I was being protected. I was being watched. On the third day, as I was sitting with Leo while he slept, my phone buzzed with a news alert. The headline made my blood run cold. Moretti air attacked. Stalker made suspected in poisoning attempt at charity gala. The article was vicious. It was Julian's narrative, polished and weaponized by a high-priced publicist. It painted me as an obsessed, mentally unstable employee who had been fired for theft and erratic behavior. It claimed I had developed a fixation on Julian and, in a fit of vengeful delusion, had tried to harm him after he gently rebuffed my advances. They used my poverty, my brother's illness, as evidence of my motive and instability. They even included an unflattering photo of me, taken from a distance, looking tired and disheveled. My hands trembled as I read the lies, the slick, cruel twisting of my desperation into something ugly and insane. They were destroying me. They were erasing the truth and painting their own masterpiece of deceit over my life. My phone rang. It was an unknown number. I almost didn't answer. "Hello." "They are clumsy," a low voice said. "Dante." "They're destroying my name," I said, my voice thick with helpless anger. "Everything they're saying is a lie." "I know," he said. There was no sympathy in his voice, only a cold statement of fact. Truth is irrelevant in a war of perception. Julian is fighting with whispers and ink. It is the weapon of a coward. "What do I do?" I asked. "You do nothing," he commanded. "You stay with your brother. You focus on his recovery. Let the dogs bark. A lion does not concern himself with the opinion of sheep." He hung up. He called me a lion. Me, the invisible maid. The chubby girl in the ill-fitting uniform. It was the most absurd, most terrifying, and most strangely empowering thing anyone had ever said to me. I did as he said. I turned off my phone. I ignored the news. I focused on Leo. He was getting better every day. The color was returning to his cheeks. He was starting to joke with the nurses. The sunlight was coming back. A week later, Marco approached me in the hospital cafeteria. It was the first time he had initiated a conversation. "The boss has arranged a place for you and your brother," he said, his voice a low rumble. "He will need quiet and clean air to recover. This is no longer the safest place for you." He drove us to a secluded house nestled in the hills outside the city. It wasn't a mansion, but a modern, comfortable home surrounded by trees and a high wall. It was secure. It was isolated. It was a beautiful prison. A nurse was there for Leo. A housekeeper came daily. Everything was provided. I lived in a state of suspended reality. My days were spent with Leo, watching him heal, taking short walks with him in the walled garden. My nights were spent alone, staring out at the distant city lights, wondering when the other shoe would drop, wondering when Dante Moretti would come to collect his debt. He never came. He never called again. His only presence was the quiet hum of the perfect, frictionless life he had constructed for me. The food that appeared in the fridge, the salary that was deposited into a new bank account he had opened for me, the silent guards at the gate. While I was living in this gilded cage, Dante was working. I didn't know the details then, only that something was shifting in the world outside my walls. I would catch snippets on the news before I learned to turn it off. Whispers of financial irregularities in Julian's charities. Rumors of a federal investigation. Julian and Isabella put on a brave face, issuing angry denials and threatening lawsuits, but I could see the cracks forming in their perfect facade. Dante was not fighting with whispers and ink. He was fighting with ledgers and audio files. He was dismantling his brother's empire brick by silent brick. A month after the gala, Marco appeared at the door. He was holding a garment bag and a box. "The boss requests your presence tonight," he said. It was not a request. My heart hammered. Where? The Museum of Art. The Autumn Gala. Another gala. The very idea made me feel sick. No, I can't. Marco's face was impassive. The boss was very clear. He said to tell you, it is time to stop being invisible. He handed me the bag and the box. He said to tell you to wear this. A car will be here at 7-inch. Inside the bag was a dress. It was simple, elegant, a deep sapphire blue. It was made of soft, heavy silk that felt like water in my hands. It was not the dress of a maid. In the box was a pair of low, comfortable heels and a simple silver necklace. He had chosen them for me. He had remembered my size, my preference for simplicity. He saw me in a way no one else ever had. I was terrified, but his words echoed in my mind. A lion does not concern himself with the opinion of sheep. At 7 o'clock, I walked out of the house. Leo was asleep, the private nurse reading in a chair beside him. He was safe. I was wearing the sapphire dress. For the first time in my life, I felt not beautiful but solid, visible. The car ride was silent. We pulled up not to the main entrance of the museum, where the cameras were flashing, but to a private side door. Dante was waiting for me inside, standing in a marble atrium, away from the crowds. He was in a perfectly tailored black suit, no tuxedo this time. He looked like a king in his own court. His eyes swept over me, a quick, assessing glance. He gave a single, almost imperceptible nod of approval. "Are you ready?" he asked. "No," I said honestly. My voice was a thin thread. "What is going to happen? Tonight, you will tell your story," he said. "And this time, they will listen." He offered me his arm. I hesitated for a second, my hand hovering over the fine wool of his suit. Touching him felt like a momentous act. I put my hand on his arm. It was like touching granite. He led me through a private corridor and into the main hall. The event was in full swing, a sea of glittering, powerful people. The moment we stepped into the room, a hush fell over the area around us. Conversations faltered. Heads turned. The air crackled with tension. I was on the arm of Dante Moretti. The invisible maid was now the tyrant's companion. I saw them almost immediately. Julian and Isabella. They were holding court near the grand staircase, but their smiles were strained. They saw us. Julian's face went white with fury, then dark with a sort of theatrical disbelief. Isabella's perfectly made-up face contorted into a mask of pure hatred. Dante paid them no mind. He led me smoothly through the crowd, which parted for him as if he were Moses and they were the Red Sea. He led me to a quiet, secluded table in an alcove with a clear view of the stage and the entire room. Marco and another large man stood discreetly nearby. "Drink this," Dante said, pushing a glass of water toward me. "Do not speak to anyone. Do not react. Just wait." The program began. Speeches were made. Awards were given. I felt hundreds of pairs of eyes on me. Whispers followed me like a cloud of insects. I could feel their judgment, their curiosity, their disdain. I kept my eyes on the glass of water in front of me, my hands clenched in my lap. Dante sat beside me, a bastion of absolute stillness. Then, the host of the evening, a well-known news anchor, stepped up to the microphone. "And now, ladies and gentlemen," she said, her voice bright, "we have a special presentation, a story of resilience and the importance of the truth. A few weeks ago, our community was rocked by allegations against one of our leading philanthropists, Mr. Julian Moretti. A murmur went through the crowd. Julian, from his table, put on a pained, noble expression. Mr. Moretti has vehemently denied these claims," the anchor continued. "And tonight, we had hoped to give him a platform to clear his name. But first, we believe it's only fair to hear from the woman at the center of the story. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Miss Elara Vance." A spotlight hit our table. My breath caught in my throat. This was it. Dante leaned in, his voice a low whisper in my ear. "Go. Just the truth. Nothing else." I stood up on trembling legs. Every eye in the room was on me. I felt their collective weight, the scorn of the wealthy and powerful for the girl who was trying to tear down one of their own. I walked to the stage. It felt a mile long. I could hear Isabella's stage whisper to a friend. Can you believe the nerve? He must be paying her. I stood at the podium. The light was blinding. The silence was absolute. I looked out at the sea of hostile, judging faces. And then I found him. Dante. He was watching me, his expression unreadable, but his presence was a strange, solid anchor in the swirling chaos of my fear. I took a breath, and I told him the truth. I didn't cry. I didn't shout. My voice shook, but it was clear. I told them about Leo. I told them about the hope Julian had sold me, and the way he had snatched it away. I told them about his words in the hallway, about being called a long shot, about being fired. I spoke of my desperation. I did not mention the Gala. I did not mention the poison. I just told the simple, unvarnished story of a powerful man's private cruelty. When I finished, the silence was different. It was no longer just hostile. It was uncertain. A few faces in the crowd looked troubled. My simple, painful story had a ring of truth that was hard to dismiss. Julian stood up from his table, his face a mask of righteous fury. "This is an outrage," he boomed, his voice full of indignation. "This is a calculated, slanderous attack by a disturbed woman. I demand that security remove her immediately." Isabella was on her feet beside him, her face flushed. "She's a liar, a pathetic, gold-digging liar." The crowd began to murmur in agreement. They were ready to believe him. He was one of them. I was not. Security started to move towards the stage. And then, the massive screens on either side of the stage, which had been displaying the museum's logo, flickered to life. An audio file began to play. The sound quality was perfect. It was Julian's voice, smooth and cruel. "It's truly pathetic, the way people like you think you're entitled to other people's money. Did you really think he was going to pay? It was just a way to keep you from blubbering all over the house." It was Isabella's voice. Recorded. A collective gasp went through the room. Isabella's face went completely white. She looked at Julian in horror. Then, another clip. Julian's voice again, this time laced with contempt. "The procedure is too experimental. The foundation has a responsibility to its donors not to throw money away on long shots." The exact words I had quoted. The exact words he had denied. The screens changed. They were no longer black. They were filled with spreadsheets, bank statements, arrows tracing vast sums of money moving from the Children's Hospital Foundation charity account into offshore shell corporations. Corporations linked at the bottom of the screen in bold red letters to Julian Moretti. The room was utterly, deathly silent. The polished monster had been unmasked. Julian stared at the screens, his mouth hanging open. The color drained from his face. He looked like a man who had just watched his own ghost walk through a wall. He looked around wildly at the faces of his friends, his backers, his society peers. He saw no support. He saw only shock and the cold, dawning beginnings of contempt. His empire of reputation, the thing he had valued above all else, had just been reduced to ashes in less than 60 seconds. He looked across the room, and his eyes finally met his brother's. Dante hadn't moved. He just sat there, watching, his face as impassive as a stone carving. It was a look of utter, final judgment. Julian stumbled backwards, knocking over a chair. He turned and tried to flee, but Marco and another of Dante's men were suddenly there, blocking his path. They didn't touch him. They just stood there, immovable objects. The gala was over. Julian Moretti's life, as he knew it, was over. I was still standing on the stage, forgotten in the fallout. Dante rose from his seat and walked toward me. He didn't look at the chaos he had wrought. He only looked at me. He came up the steps to the stage, took my arm gently, and said, "Let's go home." We walked out of the museum the same way we had come in, leaving the wreckage of a man's life behind us. The silence in the car on the way back to the house in the hills was different. It wasn't tense. It was settled. When we arrived, he walked me to the door. "He can't hurt you now," Dante said. It wasn't a promise. It was a conclusion. He can't hurt anyone. I looked up at this formidable, dangerous man who had orchestrated the public execution of his own brother. He had done it for me, or because of me. I wasn't sure which. "What happens now?" I asked, the question I had been too afraid to voice. The debt. What do I owe you? He was silent for a moment, his dark eyes studying my face in the soft light from the doorway. You owe me nothing, he said, and his voice was softer than I had ever heard it. You acted. You did what no one else had the courage to do. I didn't save you, Alara. I merely cleared the path you had already chosen. My heart ached with a strange, unfamiliar emotion. He wasn't claiming ownership. He was giving me credit. He was giving me agency. You are free to go, he continued. A trust has been established for your brother's care and your living expenses. You never have to see me again. He paused, and his gaze was intense. But I would prefer it if you stayed. Not because you owe me, but because your presence is quiet, and my life is very loud. He was giving me a choice. The most powerful man I had ever met, a man who could command the world to bend to his will, was giving me a choice. The choice is yours, he said again, as if to reinforce it. It will always be yours. He turned then and walked back to his car without another word, leaving me standing in the doorway, the echo of his words hanging in the cool night air. I didn't see him for 2 months. Life settled into a new, quiet rhythm. Julian Moretti had vanished. The news was filled with the scandal for weeks, then it faded, as all things do. He was disowned by the family, his name erased. He faced a mountain of federal charges. He was a ghost. Leo was thriving. He was out of the house, back in a special school, his laughter filling our small, comfortable apartment. Dante had arranged it for us in a quiet neighborhood, far from the shadows of his world. I had my independence. I was no longer a prisoner, gilded or otherwise. I enrolled in a community college course for bookkeeping. I wanted to build a life, my own life on my own terms. But I thought of him. I thought of Dante Moretti more than I cared to admit. I thought of his stillness, his quiet power, the way he had seen me when I was invisible to everyone else. He had given me freedom, but he had left a void, a quiet, empty space in my loud new world. He had respected my choice for silence. He had waited. One crisp autumn afternoon, I knew my answer. I knew what I wanted. I took a bus downtown. I walked to the imposing, black glass tower that housed the Moretti corporate headquarters. It was a fortress of wealth and power. A year ago, I wouldn't have dared to walk on the same side of the street. I walked into the lobby. The air was cool and silent. A stern-looking security guard at a massive marble desk looked up, his expression dismissive. "Can I help you?" he asked, his tone making it clear he doubted it. I stood up straight. I thought of a lion. I thought of a sapphire dress. "Tell Mr. Moretti that Alara Vance is here," I said. My voice did not shake. It was not a request. It was a statement. "He will see me." The guard's eyes widened slightly in surprise at my tone. He hesitated, then picked up his phone. He murmured my name into the receiver. He listened, his professional mask slipping into one of shock. He hung up the phone. "Go right up, Miss Vance," he said, his voice now laced with awe. "The penthouse elevator is for you." The elevator ride was silent and swift. It opened directly into his office. It was the same room from that first night, the same view of the city. He was standing by the window, his back to me, looking out at his kingdom. He turned as the doors opened. He wasn't surprised. He was waiting. "Alara," he said. His voice was the same low rumble, but there was something different in it, a warmth, like embers stirring. I walked towards him, my steps even and sure on the plush carpet. I stopped a few feet away from him, in the space between his world of power and my world of quiet resilience. "You said the choice was mine," I said. "I did," he confirmed, his eyes never leaving my face. "I've made my choice," I said softly. A long, silent moment passed between us. He didn't smile. Dante Moretti did not smile. But the hardness in his eyes softened, the rigid line of his shoulders relaxed. "I know," he said. He held out his hand. It was not a command. It was not a claim of ownership. It was an invitation, a question, a meeting of two worlds. I looked at his hand, strong and scarred, the hand that could destroy lives or save them. And then I looked at my own, the hand of a maid, a survivor, the hand that had once, in a moment of desperate madness, tried to tip the scales of justice. I placed my hand in his. His fingers closed around mine, warm and firm. The story the world tells is of a mafia boss and a maid he owned. But they are wrong. This was never a story about ownership. It was a story about being seen. He was the only one who ever saw me. And in the quiet of his dangerous world, I finally found the freedom to be visible. We stood there for a long time, watching the city lights come on, two survivors who had found an unlikely harbor in each other. Our beginning was born from an act of desperation at a gala, a swapped glass of wine that changed everything. And in the end, it was not about the fall of his brother, but about the quiet, steady rise of something new, something we would build together.